You know, there are certain truths in relationships that only become fully visible once we step outside of them. Human nature is like that. We often don't recognize the value of something until it slips out of our hands. And this becomes even more striking in people with narcissistic traits, those who build their entire identity on control, on being admired, and on the illusion that they always stand above everyone else. As long as love is present, they convince themselves it will never run dry. They grow accustomed to being forgiven, to having their mistakes overlooked, to being welcomed back as if it were guaranteed. But when the person who genuinely loved them finally walks away, truly walks away, leaving no emotional doorway open for hope or illusion, something inside them begins to crack. Not the explosive kind of collapse, but a slow, seeping unraveling that they can no longer ignore. And in that moment, they begin to realize they haven't just lost a relationship, they've lost the emotional anchor that kept their inner world from falling apart. The identity they constructed, the one where they were always in control, always setting the emotional rhythm, becomes unstable without someone there to hold it together. From the moment you choose to step away, the atmosphere around them shifts. Your silence carries a message they cannot twist, cannot rewrite, and cannot control. And from that point forward, two journeys begin at once. The quiet disintegration of the illusion they once lived inside, and your own journey back to yourself. So in today's video, we're going to explore a question so many people wonder about: how a narcissist truly changes when they realize they've lost the one person who loved them with sincerity. And from that moment of awakening, we enter the first shift that takes place inside them, the collapse of their illusion of control, a fracture they were never equipped to confront. For someone with narcissistic traits, control isn't merely a behavioral pattern, it is the emotional scaffolding that holds their inner world together. They feel secure only when they believe they dictate the emotional climate, the reactions, and the direction of the relationship. They live inside a narrative where they are the center of gravity, and every interaction orbits around their needs and desires. And as long as you remain softening their anger, soothing their insecurity, stabilizing their chaos, they could maintain the belief that the power was always theirs. But what they often forget is this: their so-called power never came from within. It came from the emotional labor you poured into the relationship, your patience, your steadiness, your effort to keep everything from falling apart. They mistook the stability you created for their own ability to control. And then, when you withdraw that presence firmly, completely, leaving no emotional doorway open, the illusion begins to tremble, not because they've changed, but because they no longer have the stage that once allowed them to perform their role. What shocks them most is not the absence of your affection, but the disappearance of the emotional environment that made them feel superior. The admiration they once received so effortlessly becomes silence. The emotional reactions they were accustomed to pulling from you are no longer available. And it is precisely this silence, empty, cold, non-negotiable, that destabilizes them first. At this point, a truth they've avoided for years begins to surface. The relationship didn't function because they were in control. It functioned because you were holding it together. You were the gravitational force. And once that force is gone, the world they built begins to tilt and crack. This is the moment they truly feel the loss, not the loss of you, but the loss of the power they thought they always owned. And once the illusion of control begins to fracture, another layer rises quietly from beneath the surface, a layer they never imagined they would be forced to face: the emptiness your absence creates. What most people don't realize is that genuine love has a remarkable ability to soften even the most rigid emotional landscapes. When you love a narcissist, you unconsciously become the one who regulates the emotional atmosphere around them. You soften the sharp edges, you quiet the chaos, and you dim the shadows inside them with a kind of tenderness only genuine affection can offer. To them, this gradually becomes the default setting, an emotional blanket they never learned how to provide for themselves. But when you walk away, when that blanket is suddenly pulled from under them, the emotional temperature drops instantly. Everything feels colder, harsher, and far less predictable. They don't perceive this shift through introspection but through discomfort. Silence irritates them. Emotional distance unsettles them. They instinctively reach for the familiar rhythms, a message to provoke a reaction, a small test to spark emotion, an attempt to recreate the dynamic you once stabilized, but every signal now disappears into a void. And that silent failure terrifies them. They try to fall back on their old tools, charm, seduction, manipulation, but nothing works, because the one person who once responded with sincerity is no longer playing the game. So they move to their next reflex, replacement. Someone new, easier, less demanding. At first, novelty may offer a brief surge of excitement, but almost immediately they realize these new connections are decorative, not grounding. The new laughter doesn't soothe them. The new compliments don't quiet the restlessness. The new attention doesn't fill the space you once occupied. Because the emptiness you left behind isn't the emptiness of losing a person, it is the emptiness of losing a presence. And that is something they simply cannot replace, no matter how many people they try to pull into their orbit. And when replacements no longer offer the sense of safety they once relied on, another subtle shift begins to unfold. Something they've spent their entire lives avoiding. The emptiness inside them starts turning into a mirror. You see, the emptiness at first feels like nothing more than discomfort, but when every distraction fails, when new people cannot replicate what you once provided, that emptiness stops being a vague void. It becomes a reflective surface, revealing what they've avoided looking at from the very beginning. Narcissists have always kept a safe distance from their own vulnerability. They wrap themselves in a cloak of grandiosity, sometimes as exaggerated confidence, sometimes as busyness, sometimes as the relentless need to be seen. This armor protects them from recognizing what lies underneath, the loneliness, the insecurity, the dependence on others to feel valuable. When you were still present, you unintentionally softened these sharp edges for them. But once genuine affection is gone, that emotional padding disappears too, exposing the interior they never wanted to examine. What emerges first is not insight, but panic. They scramble to rebuild the familiar defenses, inflating their ego, rewriting the story so that they were the ones who walked away, jumping into new connections to outrun the sting of loss. But this time, those strategies feel strangely weak. They no longer have enough power to cover the widening gap inside. And gradually, insecurity begins slipping into moments that used to feel harmless. Sitting alone in a quiet room, catching a familiar scent, noticing a small habit that reminds them of you. In those moments, they start confronting the questions they hate the most. Why would someone who loved me so deeply choose to leave? Maybe I'm not as special as I believed. Is mated for main 9. Will I ever find anything that feels like that again? These questions don't just puncture the illusion of superiority they built, they leave them emotionally disoriented, because the truth is, they lack the tools to face vulnerability in any healthy way. And what terrifies them the most isn't simply losing you. It's that, for the first time in their lives, they are forced to face themselves directly, without running, without masking, and without someone there to stabilize the version of themselves they tried so hard to maintain. And then, as that inner mirror begins exposing the parts of themselves they've always avoided, another phenomenon rises quietly beneath the surface, subtle, but impossible for them to outrun. The admiration cycle, the emotional fuel that once kept them functioning, begins to break down. For a narcissist, admiration isn't a luxury, it is survival. It is their oxygen, the signal that they exist, that they matter, that they are desirable, superior, worthy of devotion. And when you were still there, you supplied that oxygen so gently that even you might not have noticed it. The way you listened, the way you soothed, the way you defended them when the world seemed against them. Every small act from you became a mirror, reflecting back a value they couldn't generate on their own. But the moment you walked away, that cycle snapped. It was like switching off a machine that had been running smoothly for years. Silence replaced affirmation, and at the same time, their emotional system slipped into panic. They became restless, overly reactive, unusually sensitive. Every failed conversation, every ignored message, Every lukewarm smile from someone else felt like a blow against the fragile image they desperately tried to maintain. In their anxiety, they scramble to find a substitute, a new admirer, a new relationship, a new environment where they can shine again. But new people don't know the script. They don't understand the distorted emotional language. They don't respond in the familiar rhythm you once instinctively provided. And that alone pushes the narcissist into a new spiral. They begin to intensify everything. They exaggerate, they boast, they try to appear more irresistible, or they suddenly swing into the role of the wounded victim to gain sympathy. Yet, no matter how hard they try, the thing they crave, the feeling of being seen, nourished, validated, does not return. Outwardly, they may still laugh loudly, live dramatically, or pour themselves into new romances as if unfazed, but inwardly, the instability spreads like a crack beneath glossy paint, and in those rare moments of silence, something they've been running from finally touches them: regret and confusion. They think of you more than they would ever admit. They miss the version of themselves that only existed in the warmth of your presence. They miss the emotional stability you provided without ever asking for anything in return. They won't call it, "I was wrong." They never use those words. But deep down, they begin to understand that what they lost cannot be replaced and may never come again. And while they spiral through the chaos of their inner world, something entirely different begins to unfold on your side, quietly, slowly, but with a strength you may not recognize at first. At the beginning, the silence after walking away can feel like a shock. Hollow, aching, as if you left behind a part of your life. You were used to someone occupying space in your mind, draining your emotional energy, and when that space opens up, loneliness seems to rush in. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, that silence begins to change. The silence you once feared becomes a place where you can finally breathe. The emptiness, once filled with criticism, demands, tension, now becomes room for something else, your own voice. You start to notice how many times you minimized yourself just to avoid conflict. How often you apologized for things that weren't your fault. How many needs you buried because you knew they would be mocked or dismissed. With them gone, you suddenly see how deeply exhausted you had been fighting to preserve peace in a relationship where you were the only one making an effort. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Your body begins to shift. You sleep better. You breathe deeper. Your smile returns without effort. You learn to enjoy being alone, not because you're lonely, but because you're finally at peace. You start trusting your intuition again, the very intuition that had been gaslit until you doubted your own reality. And most importantly, you recognize that the traits they exploited, your compassion, your loyalty, your emotional depth, were never weaknesses. They were strengths that simply needed the right environment to shine. From that recognition, you begin building boundaries, not out of resentment, but out of respect for yourself. You become more selective about who gets access to your heart, and gradually, your life shifts its center of gravity. It no longer revolves around keeping them satisfied, but around honoring the person you were always meant to be. And as you move far enough away from the old chaos, the story begins to open into a deeper layer, one that many people don't recognize until they've truly stepped out of the wound, the spiritual dimension. The pain inflicted by a narcissist isn't just emotional abrasion. It strikes the core of who you are, your beliefs, your sense of identity, your longing to belong. And right at the center of what feels like ruin, another process begins to take shape, quiet, subtle, but more transformative than anything that came before. Some call it God, others call it the universe, truth, or a higher power. Whatever name you give it, the message is the same. You were never abandoned. The moment you were hurt, something almost paradoxical happened. Truth started unveiling itself. Curtains you once couldn't pull down now fall away on their own. You begin to see the manipulation that once hid beneath the word love. You see the gap between their words and their actions. You see the patterns repeating across your life, even reaching back to childhood. All those times you were made to shrink, to stay quiet, to endure, just to be accepted. At first, truth is blinding. It hurts. It destabilizes you. It forces you to question what you believed, what you tolerated, what you called love. But eventually, you come to understand, truth is the doorway to freedom. From that truth, your identity begins to rebuild itself. Not the version they defined, not the shadow you bent yourself into, but the original version, the one you were meant to be from the beginning. You relearn the language of boundaries. You begin to see the protection of your peace as sacred, not selfish. And the distance between you and them, whether chosen or circumstantial, becomes a form of divine protection, a space where you are pulled away from a battlefield that slowly drained the life out of you. Gradually, pain is recycled into wisdom. It teaches you what you can no longer ignore. It reveals the parts of yourself you abandoned just to be loved. And within that awakening, the deepest questions rise to the surface. What do I truly want? What kind of love do I deserve? Who am I when I'm no longer defined by my wounds? From those questions, a new purpose begins to form, not built from fear, but from clarity. And when every layer of emotion has finally been peeled back, when every illusion has fallen away, what remains is no longer a question about them, but an answer about you. Being wounded by someone who was supposed to love you is one of the deepest fractures a heart can endure. Being diminished, dismissed, or replaced so effortlessly can make you question your worth and your place in the world. But right at the point where you feel cast out from what you thought was love, another process, quiet but persistent, begins within you. You slowly realize that human rejection is never the final verdict on your value. It is only the surface of a deeper movement where God, the universe, or the healthiest part of your own spirit, is quietly returning you to a sense of belonging, not in the shifting eyes of the narcissist, but in your own eyes and in the gaze of the one who knows you fully. Your pain is not shoved aside, it's acknowledged. It becomes material for rebuilding your voice, your boundaries, and the purpose you had buried to keep someone else comfortable. You rise not merely as someone who survived harm, but as someone who carries a kind of soft, yet sharp knowing, the ability to understand others' wounds, to create safety, and to use your story as living proof of human resilience. This ending does not promise that the narcissist will change, awaken, or apologize, because the truth is, the most important thing has never been whether they recognize what they lost, but whether you recognize that losing them was never your greatest loss. Losing yourself would have been, and by walking away, facing the pain, and choosing healing, you refuse to lose yourself one more time. So, if your heart aches a little tonight, let it. It's simply the last echo of an old version of you dissolving, so a clearer, calmer, stronger version can finally take its place.